Welcome to Deep Dive, a sort of personal project that I felt I had to share. I have more than 30 books in queue and probably another 30 topics that I want to learn more about. And sometimes I want to hear a summary before I invest a couple of days of deep dive. This podcast is a result of that need. With the help of some Google apps and tools, what you have here is a podcast format that is surprisingly entertaining, even if it's a bit comprehensive. For this episode, we talk about Ley Lines. Our sources are Ley Lines, The Greatest Landscape Mystery by Danny Sullivan, Ley Lines and Earth Energies, a groundbreaking exploration of Earth's natural energy and how it affects our health, by David R. Cowan and Chris Arnold, and The Sacred Network Megaliths, Cathedrals, Ley Lines, and the Power of Shared Consciousness by Chris H. Hardy.
You ever look out at a landscape and feel like there's a story just beneath the surface, like a hidden code?
Definitely.
That's exactly what we're diving into today. The really intriguing world of Ley Lines. And you're here because you want to get smart on this, quickly and thoroughly. That's our mission.
Right.
You've got a really fascinating collection of sources. They cover everything from the first theories to, some scientific head scratchers.
And some pretty out there ideas too, connecting it all to energy, even consciousness.
Exactly. But don't worry about getting bogged down in jargon. We're going to unpack this so it clicks. Hopefully give you plenty of those aha moments.
Precisely. Our sources, they really explore how this Ley line concept first popped up.
Yeah.
Then what attempts were made to, investigate them scientifically.
The folklore too, right? That's huge.
Oh, absolutely. The rich folklore around ancient sites, and then these more recent, pretty radical ideas linking the landscape to earth energies and even our own minds. It's quite a journey through different ways of seeing things.
So the goal is really understanding what these sources tell us small lines might be.
Yes. And just as importantly, what they suggest they are not. We'll trace the origins, look at all the interpretations, and those big questions that are still kind of hanging in the air.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. It seems like the whole idea really kicked off with a chap named Alfred Watkins back in Edwardian England.
That's the guy, Alfred Watkins. And he apparently had this, he called it a revelation about old straight tracks.
A revelation. Sounds dramatic.
Well, you have to think about the context. Edwardian England, there was this growing fascination with the past, right? And Watkins himself, he wasn't just some casual observer. He was really multifaceted, knew local history, archaeology, even odd stuff like beekeeping.
So he had a broad perspective.
Exactly, that wide lens. Plus, he was incredibly meticulous, very detailed.
Yeah.
That was crucial in how he developed his ideas. He'd written other stuff before, so he wasn't exactly coming out of nowhere.
Right. And his big idea was spotting these alignments between ancient sites.
Yeah, all sorts. Old trackways, moats, mounds, camps, standing stones, churches sometimes. He saw lines connecting them.
And he noticed the name Lely popping up along these lines.
He did. He thought that was significant, maybe a Saxon place name element hinting at these tracks. He laid it all out in his 1922 book, Early British Trackways, and then the more famous one, The Old Straight Track.
So it wasn't just a vague feeling. It sounds like he had data evidence.
Oh, absolutely. He meticulously documented these alignments. He saw the landscape of his time as just, layered with the past.
Right.
He even felt these old ways of moving were still echoed in people's habits, their language. Yeah. He mentions people giving directions based on these old straight routes, even if they weren't the quickest anymore.
Huh. That's interesting.
Yeah, his conviction was pretty bold for the time. It offered a whole new way to think about ancient heritage, which people were just starting to, grasp full depth of.
And this idea caught on. Didn't he start a club or something?
He did, yeah. The Straight Track Postal Portfolio Club. Bit of a mouthful.
Huh?
It did kind of lose steam after World War II, but the sheer amount of stuff they gathered, all those detailed notes, observations on early Ley hunting, ancient sites.
Where did it all go?
It's preserved in Hereford now. A fantastic resource, really, if you want to dig into the early days of this research.
So even if his original theory is debated now.
Oh, for sure. But Watkins was definitely a catalyst. He really got people looking at ancient sites differently, changed attitudes.
Okay, so the initial thought was mostly, these are old trade routes. Simple as that.
That was the core idea, yeah. Practical pathways.
But then the interpretation started to broaden out a bit.
Right. And this raises that key question. If they weren't just for trade, What else could these alignments be about? A really big shift in thinking came around the 1960s with Gerald Hawkins's work on Stonehenge.
Ah, the astronomical computer idea.
Exactly, suggesting Stonehenge was this sophisticated calculator that really shook up the academic world. It implied ancient builders had this level of knowledge, this intent.
Okay, I see. So that opened the door to thinking alignments might have other purposes, not just getting from A to B.
Precisely. Purposes beyond the purely practical.
And this is where it gets really interesting for me, because it feels like Ley Line research kind of splits here, doesn't it?
It really does diverge. You had some sticking closer to Watkins, maybe refining the trackway idea, looking for practical reasons.
But others went in a totally different direction.
Yeah, they started exploring this whole area of like earth energies and sacred landscapes.
All right, the energy lines.
Some researchers became pretty critical, saying, look, these long-distance alignments could just be coincidence, chance.
I've heard that argument.
But others completely embraced it. They connected Leides to these notions of energy flows, a deeper cosmic significance embedded in the land itself.
And that's where you get things like Hamish Miller's work, The Sun and the Serpent.
That's a key example. Really popular, though often debated. It proposed these like intertwining energy lines focusing on the St. Michael line in England.
Capture the imagination, sounds like.
It really did. But, it's generally seen more as an imaginative exploration, maybe not strictly scientific.
But wait, not everyone looking beyond tracks went straight to, like, spiritual energy, right? What about John Mitchell? His approach seems a bit different.
Mitchell's fascinating, yeah. His focus was quite specific. He was inspired by an astronomer, Sir Norman Lockyer, and did these detailed studies of astronomical alignments at stone circles down in Cornwall, West Penwith.
So, astronomy, but grounded in the stones themselves.
Exactly. But he went further than just looking at the sky. His work, especially in the old stones of Land's End, he argued for these deliberately planned patterns of aligned standing stones, all put up around the same time.
And he wasn't just using maps.
No, crucially, he was out there in the field. He actually found previously unrecorded stones that fit these alignments.
Wow. That would strengthen the case for intentional design.
Big time. And he also established that many stones in these lines were indivisible, you could see from one to the next. That suggests deliberate ground-based planning by the builders, not just lines on a map.
Interesting. And didn't one of the first lines rediscovered in modern times, the Blackwoodine Ley, come from around that period?
Yeah, it highlights that this wasn't purely abstract theory even early on. People were finding these things on the ground.
Okay, so we've got historical tracks, maybe astronomy, and this split towards energy. This popularity of leys as veins of energy connecting sacred sites. That's pretty widespread now, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. That notion really gained traction, especially, like I mentioned, when crop circles started appearing more visibly near ancient sites, end of the 20th century.
People thought maybe the lines are the power source.
Kind of. If there's something special about Stonehenge, Avebury, maybe these lines are the channels for that power, or related to why phenomena appear there.
But did science find anything? What about projects like the Dragon Project?
Well, that's the thing. When you look at formal scientific investigations trying to measure this energy, like the Dragon Project, the results were, well, largely inconclusive.
So no smoking gun.
Not really. They didn't solve the enigma of the old straight track, as Watkins put it, or definitively prove unusual energy effects were happening. It just highlights how tricky it is trying to measure something that isn't clearly defined by, traditional science.
But then you hear about telluric energy and dowsing.
No.
People with divining rods finding lines. How does that fit in?
Right. So that moves into a different realm, doesn't it? Perception, interaction with the landscape, beyond conventional measurement.
Telluric energy. Like natural earth current.
That's the general idea, yeah. A kind of natural electricity in the earth. And dowsing is presented as a way to sense these subtle energies.
Using those bent wire rods?
Typically angle rods, yeah. Often just like 16-inch wires bent with a 6-inch handle. The idea is you walk, and when you cross an energy line, the rods react.
What do?
They might cross over or swing outwards, supposedly reacting to this sinuous wave-like energy coming vertically from stones or along the lines.
You have to be moving.
Generally, yes. The dowser's movement seems to be key for the rods to work. It's interesting, the British Society of Dowsers actually has an Earth energy group trying to standardize names for different perceived energies.
Really? So they think there are different kinds?
Apparently so. It just shows the variety of phenomena people are reporting when they douse these sites.
And it feels like this whole earth energy idea really resonated, partly thanks to people like Janet and Colin Board.
Oh, definitely. Their books, Mysterious Britain, The Secret Country, they were hugely influential. They kind of popularized mirth mysteries.
How did they do that?
They just had this way of blending imaginative speculation with really evocative photography. Created this romantic, mysterious view of the past in these sites.
Yeah, I can picture that.
And if you go to somewhere like Avebury today, you see the legacy of that. People touching the stones, dousing, interacting in ways that reflect those ideas.
But that belief in some kind of power at these places, that's older than the 70s, right?
Oh, much older. Which brings us nicely to folklore and tradition. Ancient stones have been linked to all sorts of powers for a very, very long time.
Like what?
Well, you find stones believed to help with fertility or ensure easy childbirth. There are examples from Scotland, Brittany.
And offerings.
Yeah, customs like pouring libations, milk or water maybe, into cup marks or hollows on stones. An example from the Orkneys is mentioned.
And effects on farming.
That too. Beliefs that stand stones could influence crop fertility or the health of cattle. There's a Respring Cross example. It shows this deep connection between the stones and the community's survival, really.
And how did the church deal with all this pre-Christian belief?
It's fascinating. Sometimes they seem to tolerate it, maybe turn a blind eye. Other times they'd reinterpret the stones,
How so?
link them to fairies or even the devil. You see that with sites like the Hurlers or Stanton Drew. It might have been a way to, integrate the old beliefs into the new religion while subtly discouraging the actual pagan practices.
Clever. So, alongside all this folklore, you still had people like Alexander Thom and Gerald Hawkins taking a more, scientific approach, looking at the astronomy again.
Exactly. Thom meticulously surveyed hundreds of sites, arguing for sophisticated geometry and astronomical alignments. Hawkins, as we said, with Stonehenge. So you constantly have this interplay between the more mystical or folkloric view and the more measurable scientific approach.
And that interplay continues, doesn't it? Attempts to actually measure energy or even influence it.
Right into recent times. People trying everything from psychic methods to using devices, Wilhelm Reich's orgone accumulators, cloudbusters.
Seriously, cloudbusters.
Yeah, trying to see if they could affect the atmosphere or energy around sites. Monitoring radiation, electric fields, other signals, looking for anomalies.
And what about the stones themselves? Any theories there?
Well, there's the idea some stones might have been chosen for specific properties, like being magnetic, possibly for healing. There's a mention of the Acorthes stone in Scotland.
And then the personal experiences. People claiming to see things. Fairies, spirits.
That adds another layer, the subjective experience. It suggests that maybe some people just have a heightened sensitivity, maybe faculties for extrasensory perception that vary from person to person.
It even touches on some quite profound areas, like the ritual use of human bones, skull.
Yes, and the idea that in the past, someone hearing voices might not have been seen as, say, schizophrenic, but as an oracle. Someone with a special connection, maybe communicating with ancestors through those remains.
Wow. That really shows how our understanding, our frameworks change over time.
Completely. How we interpret consciousness and the mind shapes everything.
Okay, so we've covered straight tracks, energy lines, folklore, but then our sources introduce this other concept, teller fields, telepathic harmonic fields, linked to consciousness. That sounds like a big leap.
It is a significant conceptual jump, yeah. But what's intriguing is this idea that consciousness itself isn't just passive. It can actually create a kind of energetic structure in a place.
How would that work?
The concept proposes that when minds in a sacred space become harmonized, maybe through focused meditation, chanting, even communal music making.
Like a shared focus.
Exactly. That shared focus can generate these, they're described as measurable energy fields. Telhar fields.
And they have boundaries.
Apparently, yes.
Wow.
Described as having clear spatial limits, a precise boundary on the ground, and forming almost like an invisible grid or dome above that area.
And what's it like inside one?
The experience is said to be one of deep telepathic connection, a sort of harmonic attunement, a sense of being part of a collective mind.
You mentioned music, like people singing together. That feeling of unity.
That's a good analogy. That powerful sense of unity and shared energy you can get from group singing could be seen as a kind of everyday example of this principle.
But it's not just in, monasteries or during rituals. There's an example about someone feeling it while shopping.
Yeah, that's presented as a kind of striking anecdotal piece of evidence. The idea being that once a teller field is established, it can act like an attractor.
Drawing people in.
drawing sensitive minds in, shifting their state into this collective, harmonized one, even unexpectedly.
And from that, the theory kind of expands globally.
It does. To the possibility of connecting these individual Telhar fields across the planet, creating a network of interconnected minds.
Wow.
It's even suggested that during times of heightened cosmic energy solstices, equinoxes, full moons, you might potentially achieve a closed planetary circle of consciousness.
That's a big idea. And connecting to these fields is supposed to have effects.
Within this framework, yes. Heightened states of awareness, maybe anomalous phenomena occurring, even enhanced psi capacities, psychic abilities are suggested possibilities.
And this ties into architecture too. Cathedrals as cosmic vessels.
Right. The idea is that cathedrals weren't just built anywhere. They were often placed on ancient sacred spots aligned with these supposed cosmotelluric lines.
Lines connecting Earth and cosmos.
That's the idea. And that the design itself, using sacred geometry, the golden proportion, was intended to actively generate these harmonized consciousness fields, these Telhar fields.
And energy arcs coming off buildings.
There's mention of observations, yeah. Energy arcs darting from domes or steeples. Again, quite experiential accounts.
You know, it reminds me of musicians jamming. When they really lock in, it feels like one mind playing.
That's a perfect analogy. That feeling of deep connection, shared creativity, where the improvisation seems to come from somewhere beyond just the individuals. That's seen as a smaller scale example of this Telhar field concept. Shared focus, creating a unified state.
Okay, then there's this next layer. Semantic energy and semantic fields theory. How does that connect?
Semantic fields theory, or SFT, it proposes something pretty fundamental, that all matter, not just living things, has a kind of underlying semantic level.
Meaning?
Reflecting the meanings and relationships associated with it, like the history and significance of an object.
Okay.
And our personal semantic energy, linked to our consciousness, can apparently be amplified in heightened states and potentially influence objects around us.
Especially meaningful objects, like relics or art.
Exactly. Things imbued with significance through worship or creation. The idea of grand auras seen around meditators, like in Tibetan depictions of the Buddha's double aura, is also linked to this expanded energy fields connected to consciousness, maybe achieving illumination.
And people report seeing things themselves. Luminous rays.
There are personal accounts mentioned, yeah. Seeing rays during heightened states, maybe connecting to distant people or related to inner transformations like heart chakra activation.
There's also mention of experiencing extended energy fields while traveling, like touching the landscape.
Yeah, feeling like your personal energy field expands way beyond your body, almost sliding through the landscape, possibly originating from lower chakras. It illustrates this idea of consciousness and energy extending outwards in altered states.
So the semantic aura is this consciousness energy field around us.
That's the concept. Expandable in altered states, blending with our smaller biological aura. And it's thought to be organized around psychic centers, the chakras.
And you can change it intentionally.
Through practices like visualization, yes. Modifying its configuration.
How does all this field stuff connect back to the actual physical landscape? The sacred sites, the lines?
Well, the theory suggests that established spiritual networks, like, say, Christian churches and monasteries, often got overlaid onto or enmeshed with older sacred sites.
Like druidic sites or megaliths.
Exactly. Creating this kind of continuity, expanding a sacred grid anchored to those cosmotelluric lines we talked about.
So it's a network.
A sacred network. And it's not just religious buildings, even non-religious ones built using sacred geometry libraries. Palaces are seen as potentially integrated into this network.
And cities, like the Axis in Paris.
Yeah, the idea is that major axes in cities might be built upon or deliberately aligned with energy lines connecting important sacred buildings, using things like metro stations sometimes as markers for these lines.
And monuments using sacred geometry, like the obelisk in Paris.
Like the golden rectangles, diagonals,
Yeah.
suggesting intentional layout linked to these energetic principles. It connects sites across cultures and times.
How? Just planning by secret societies? Or something else?
Well, both are suggested. Intentional architectural planning using sacred geometry, maybe by groups preserving that knowledge, but also potentially using the Earth's natural geomagnetic field and tapping into those ancient lays.
You mentioned A spots and G spots at sacred sites.
Yeah, A spots being high points like temples or domes, G spots being grounding points like caves or springs. The idea is they might create these interlacing flows of ascending and grounding energy.
And the network lines often run over hilltops,
Makes sense, right? Makes the sites visible, geometrically well placed. And churches built on these spots could then enhance and anchor those existing lines, contributing to this complex sacred network interwoven with the natural telluric grid.
This theory even talks about conversations between consciousnesses from different times.
It does, suggesting a non-local nature of consciousness, as SFT proposes. The idea is that semantic fields connect based on shared values or feelings, transcending linear time.
And ecofields, the consciousness of nature.
Yeah, the consciousness associated with natural systems, the sea, forests, mountains. It's a concept found in many cultures, potentially bridging scientific ecology with meditative perspectives.
So in altered states, you might access a semantic dimension. Talk to minds from the past.
That's the suggestion, going beyond just symbolic dreams to potentially real, non-local communication. It definitely pushes against classical physics.
But maybe aligns more with quantum ideas.
Well, non-local correlations are fundamental in quantum physics, so there's maybe a resonance there, conceptually.
Okay, wow. That's a lot to unpack on the consciousness side. Let's loop back to where we started, with Watkins and the old straight track.
Back to basics, yeah.
Beyond just physical paths, you mentioned he found another link with straightness, moral authority.
He did, which is a bit unexpected. He noted biblical passages linking straight paths with righteousness, godly living. It suggests straightness itself might have held a deeper symbolic meaning.
Interesting. And this wasn't just a British thing. Straight tracks elsewhere.
Seems not. The sources mention evidence in other parts of the world, like those wide, straight roads built by the Nazca people in South America.
The Nazca Lines. But we don't know exactly why they were built.
Their purpose is still debated. Maybe roads, maybe ceremonial. No definitive astronomical link has been proven for most of them.
But someone else found similar tracks in South America.
Yeah, Toni Morrison. He independently found ancient straight trackways there, still in use, fitting Watkins' model remarkably well.
And these tracks often link sacred places.
That seems to be a recurring theme across the Americas. Fragments of straight road systems linking holy or sacred sites. Dr. Gahn described a causeway in Yucatan connecting Coba and Chichen Itza, for instance.
It even pops up in folklore, doesn't it? Supernatural beings moving in straight lines, like Irish ferry passes.
Exactly. The belief that ferries travel in straight lines between their forts or mounds and the danger of building something in their path.
Don't block the ferry commute.
Pretty much. It really underscores how important linearity could be in the cultural landscape. And you see potential alignments between ancient earthworks, raths, and natural mounds in Ireland too, echoing those Watkinsian principles.
And what about things like the Cursus monuments near Stonehenge?
Good example. These long Neolithic features parallel banks and ditches running straight for miles, sometimes with mounds at the ends. Their exact purpose is unknown, but again, straightness seems key.
Then there's crossroads, always seen as spooky places.
Definitely. Traditionally, liminal spaces, boundaries, places for spirit contact, wayside shrines were often put there, but also where outcasts' suicides were sometimes buried.
Leading to ghost stories.
Loads of them. And it connects to modern accounts too. Phantom encounters on roads, often at crossroads, fords, bridges.
Like the examples given. The girl at Red Bridge in Powys, the figure on the A12.
Right. These modern and traditional stories tap into that idea of spirit paths, which might link back to Leys. That concept actually emerged earlier and kind of got folded into the broader Earth energy theories later on.
And it's fascinating how these lines get reused or incorporated later. Roman roads aligning with churches.
Yeah, Ermine Street aligning with Cirencester Church Tower, the Fossway also having alignments. And churches themselves oriented along cathedral axes, sometimes marked out by roads, like in Speyer, Germany.
So rearranging cities to fit these Christian alignments.
Seems like it. Suggesting maybe an incorporation or perhaps even a symbolic exorcism of older pagan sites through these new dominant alignments.
There are other specific named lies, like in Yorkshire.
The Devil's Arrows lies,
Yeah.
Aligning Neolithic standing stones with later henges and mounds. It just shows this ongoing recognition of, or maybe creation of, linear connections across the landscape over millennia.
So bringing this all together as we wrap up, it's clear that ley lines, old straight tracks, it's just this incredibly complex tapestry, isn't it?
It really is. You've got historical observation, archaeology, folklore, scientific attempts, successful or not, to look at energy.
And then these really expansive ideas about consciousness, secret networks.
Exactly. What's so striking is how that initial observation by Watkins, whether you agree with his interpretation or not, sparked such a huge range of thought and investigation over the last century.
Yeah.
And even though that original simple idea of prehistoric trackways has been, heavily debated, refined, criticized,
The core observation of alignments persists.
it does. And that enduring belief or feeling that certain places have a special quality, maybe connected by these lines, that continues to fascinate people from totally different viewpoints.
It's that mix, isn't it? Rational investigation bumping up against more intuitive, esoteric understandings, all trying to make sense of our place in the landscape.
Absolutely. It really underlines the ongoing mystery of it all.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe for you listening. Considering all these diverse perspectives we've touched on today, from physical lines on a map to potential energy flows, even these fields of consciousness,
Yeah.
what do you find the most compelling way to understand this enduring human fascination with lines across the landscape?
Yeah, maybe thinking about your own experiences. Places that feel special or significant to you. Could that offer a clue, a different perspective on what might be going on? Something to mull over.